The midday sun in Samaria had a sharpness of its own. It didn't soften the earth or warm the skin. It burned with a clarity that made the rocks shimmer like metal. Across that shimmering landscape ran a narrow path, cutting through slopes of pale, thirsty soil. Along that path walked a woman, holding a clay jar tight against her chest, as though it was the last layer between her and a world she didn't trust. Her pace sat somewhere between hurry and hesitation, steady, practiced, shaped by years of trying not to draw attention, just enough to move forward, just enough to remain unnoticed. You're listening to this story from God's Word in the Clouds. If your heart has been carrying too much today, or if you simply need a quiet place to breathe, stay with us for a moment. The story you're about to hear has traveled across centuries, not because of its setting, but because of the healing that unfolds within it. She had grown used to the silence of noon. It was the only time she could leave her home, without passing by groups of neighbors, who spoke softly but meant every word to be heard. People defined her by fragments of her past, never caring how those pieces broke. 5 marriages behind her, and a relationship she could hardly call stable now. Every chapter of her story seemed to end in the same place. A quiet ache she no longer tried to explain. At this hour, she did not have to defend herself. She did not have to pretend. She only had to walk. The jar pressed against her ribs was heavy, but not as heavy as everything she carried inside. Jacob's well stood in an open field, wide and exposed. Beside it sat a man whose presence felt strangely intentional. He wasn't sheltered from the heat, yet. He seemed unbothered by it, as though the moment mattered more than the comfort. His posture wasn't rigid, nor did it show impatience. It held the quiet certainty of someone who knew exactly why he was there. His disciples had gone to buy food in the nearby town, leaving him alone with the stillness of the afternoon. The scene looked ordinary on the surface. A well, a traveler, the distant hum of wind, but the air carried something expectant, as if unseen threads were pulling 2 lives toward each other. When she approached the well, the man turned his gaze toward her. There was no surprise in his expression, no quick assessment of who she might be. Instead, he looked at her, as though he recognized the weight she tried to hide. Then he spoke. "Would you give me a drink?" The request wasn't demanding or casual. It had the tone of someone inviting a conversation that could unfold gently, without pressure. She wasn't used to such moments. A Jewish teacher addressing her, a Samaritan woman with a complicated past, defied every social rule she knew. Her steps slowed, as though part of her wanted to answer, and another part feared what this interaction might uncover. She questioned him, not angrily, but with honest confusion. Why would he, a Jewish man, ask water from someone like her? He didn't step back. He didn't retreat into cultural boundaries. His reply carried a layer she couldn't quite grasp. "If you understood who was speaking with you, you would ask me, and I would give you living water." The phrase unsettled her in an unfamiliar way. Living water. A kind of sustenance she had never heard anyone describe. She had come for water to carry home, yet something about his words suggested he meant a thirst far deeper than anything the well before her could satisfy. He told her to bring her husband. The request touched a place inside her she rarely allowed herself to feel. She replied simply, "I have no husband." The man held her eyes with a steady calm that neither cornered nor released her. "You've spoken truthfully," he said. "You've had several, and the man you live with now is not your husband." He wasn't exposing her. He wasn't dragging her history into the open. He spoke about her life, the way a healer speaks about an old scar, with understanding, not accusation. A part of her braced for judgment, but it never came. What she found instead was the unfamiliar experience of being known, without being diminished. In that moment, memories rose in her like shadows meeting sunlight. The promises that faded, the nights she waited alone, the longing to belong somewhere that didn't demand perfection she couldn't give. Most people saw her decisions. He saw her pain. Most saw the pattern. He saw the wounds behind it. For years she had protected her heart by lowering her head and avoiding questions. Yet with this man, she felt the space to breathe, without pretending she was fine. Trying to steady herself, she spoke about the Messiah, the long-awaited figure her people believed would come someday, to clarify the mysteries they struggled to understand. It was her way of reaching for something hopeful. Without admitting how much she needed hope, the man answered with quiet certainty, "I am he." Her world shifted. The dust, the heat, the long walk, none of it mattered. Everything inside her felt suddenly awake. Something in her loosened, as though the burden she had carried for years finally had a place to rest. It wasn't relief, and it wasn't excitement. It was recognition, the sense that the one standing before her understood the parts of her story she had tried to bury. The living water he mentioned no longer sounded symbolic. It felt like a promise, breaking open inside her chest. She hadn't come looking for transformation, yet she found herself standing in the middle of it. Without realizing it, she set down the jar beside the well. The very purpose of her trip no longer held the same importance. Her steps quickened as she turned back toward town. This time, she didn't move quietly or try to blend into her surroundings. Something inside her had changed direction. She was no longer trying to avoid people. She was searching for them. She had to tell someone what she had just experienced. When she reached the people she once avoided, they immediately sensed a difference in her. Her voice carried clarity, her posture held confidence, and her eyes reflected something that looked very close to peace. She said, "Come see the man who told me everything about my life, not to confess, but to testify to the freedom she had discovered." Curiosity pulled them toward the well. But more than curiosity, it was the unmistakable evidence of a life restored that drew them in. The story at the well is not just about a woman in Samaria. It's about anyone who has carried shame like a second skin. Anyone who has walked alone because facing people felt harder than facing the heat of the day. Maybe you've hidden parts of your story so deeply that even you rarely touch them. Maybe you've wondered if your mistakes define you. Maybe you've walked roads you're not proud of. The encounter at the well shows something timeless. Jesus meets people precisely where they fear they don't belong. He doesn't seek perfect histories. He seeks honest hearts. And when he speaks to your wounds, he does it with a gentleness that lifts rather than crushes. If you've been thirsty for peace, for clarity, for a sense of home within your own soul, his presence offers a well that doesn't run dry. Thank you for spending this time here. If you'd like more stories told with this kind of quiet depth, feel free to subscribe. May peace settle into your evening, and may the living water he offered that woman find its way into your own life, in the moments when you need it most.